The day. I know it's been a long day, but it's good to end with a bang. So, Michael Herrod is here to speak with you, and he's fresh off the heels of award success from the Royal Television Society. 2 awards, was it?
I think 4 in total, but 2 for foreign news in particular.
Foreign news, so great success. But of course, it all began right here, not in this very room, I don't think. But he studied broadcast journalism here at what was Trinity and All Saints back in 1995. So 20 years, this could be used standing in front of like-minded students as well and talking. After his degree, he worked in local radio, then joined ITN when Channel 5 News began, working as a news desk assistant. At Channel 5, he covered the death of Diana in Paris and World Cup in France, among other things. In '99, he joined ITV News as a specialist producer in the medical and consumer department, and then Europe producer based in Brussels. He's also worked in New York, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan after 9/11, etc. In 2007, he was Washington producer and worked on both elections of Barack Obama, and in 2013 was appointed head of foreign news at ITV News. So, join me please in welcoming Michael Herrod.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to move around a bit because, unlike your last speaker, I can't stand still. So it's great to be back. This wasn't here. I'm reliably informed this was a porter cabin when I was here. So things have changed a little bit, and the studio that we had was over at in Bradford. I'll just go a little bit into me first, because it perhaps is helpful to realise that actually not too many years after sitting here, you could be working in wherever you want to work. A couple of years after leaving here, and I did the Bimedia broadcast journalism course, and then got a job at what was Channel 5 News, then made by ITN. I had a phone call one night when I was at home in a new flat in London. Actually, I didn't have a phone call, it was a pager, an ancient thing called a pager. And it went off and it said, "Dodie dead, Diana injured, please phone desk." And they knew I spoke French. So I went out of my house, putting my clothes on over my pajamas, went to a phone box, a thing called a phone box, phoned in on a free phone number, and they said, "Yeah, there's been a car crash in Paris in a tunnel. We don't quite know what's happened, but Dodie Fayed is dead. Diana maybe, but maybe not." So I rushed into the office. There was a correspondent there waiting, a woman called Juliette Bremner, who is now a correspondent at ITV News, had previously been a correspondent for the BBC in the Northwest. And there was a cameraman with a car and a camera, and we got into that vehicle about 1 in the morning and drove. And by about 10 in the morning, I was standing by the Pont d'Alma, the tunnel where already there were flowers being laid. And I stayed for the rest of that week, came back, and the rest is history, because it was a successful trip. If you're ready to be thrown in at the deep end on stories like that, and you do well with the grounding you get here, in what I think is probably the most exciting profession going, because I've loved every minute of what I've done. And the very fact that you're here shows that you've probably chosen the right direction to go in, because don't stop now, because it's great. You will go to places potentially that your friends will be jealous of. You'll meet the most amazing people. You'll see the most amazing things. If you have that passion and that drive, that enthusiasm, that desire to tell people about things that you think they should know about, tell people about things that you think are important, things that excite you and you want to tell them about it, then you're in the right place. And I would encourage anyone to give this profession a go, because potentially it is a really great career and you'll have a really great time. Not the best paid, but you will see things and experience things that other people won't. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do now. I'm foreign editor or head of foreign news at ITV News. ITV News is made by ITN, this strange organisation that makes news for Channel 4 News, ITV News, and Channel 5 News. 3 separate newsrooms, but you may, if you watch those bulletins, see the same pictures. ITV News is the biggest of the 3, has the most resources, has the most cameras, will generally do most of the news gathering for those 3 channels. Channel 4 News has its own cameras, and they'll add bits to what we do, Channel 5 similarly. So I'm responsible for all the foreign stories that you'll see on ITV News. So, for example, tonight there will be a piece out of Russia on the funeral of Boris Nemtsov. There will be a piece potentially out of Kuwait on looking into the background of the man we knew as Jihadi John. There will be a piece tomorrow out of northern Iraq. So I'm responsible for the deployment, editorial discussions, the safety, and liaising with programs of all those people that get sent abroad. And that takes numerous different forms. In terms of television news gathering, and I'm very well aware, and I'll come on to this later on, that the news playing field, if you like, is changing. So I'll talk about television news as it is now and as it has been traditionally first, because it clearly has changed in my time and is changing all the time. Basically, in terms of foreign news, you have your foreign correspondents, a number of those who may be based abroad. From my perspective, we have a big office in Washington, one in Dubai, one in Brussels, one in China, one in South Africa, one in Tel Aviv. Those allow you to cover stories in what hopefully are hotspots, as it were, for news, but also put you a little bit closer to stories if you need to travel to another story. Those bureaux are staffed with a correspondent, a cameraman who also edits, cameraman or camerawoman, but a cameraman in the case of all our bureau, and usually a local producer who, for example, in China would speak Mandarin, because that's very useful and very helpful. Those all feed back into us, and I deploy them, I send them on stories. No one, even the BBC, can get away with just that, and the BBC have far more bureau than us. So we also pay agencies, Reuters Television, Associated Press Television, also known as APTN, to provide us with lots of camera coverage elsewhere. They might be based in Ukraine, for example, in Kiev. They'll go and shoot some pictures that we can't get ourselves. So in that way, you get all that picture coming in as well to us. We also have affiliations with other broadcasters, particularly NBC, in our case CNN, and other broadcasters around the world. That also feeds into us. We have a reciprocal arrangement. So in that way, there's quite a lot of information, quite a lot of access to different picture coming in to the centre, the newsroom in London. And it's my job to coordinate all of that, to send correspondence to particular stories, or to, more difficult this one, not send them when they want to go. Because often they'll say, oh, we want to do this great story about so-and-so, and it's like, well, no one cares about that. Why would I be interested in that? You may want to go because it's a very nice place, but I don't want you to go because it's very expensive. So I have to make those sorts of decisions. In addition to which, there is the constant battle against technology. The internet has been extremely useful in allowing us to broadcast from places that we couldn't broadcast from in the past. There's not many places that I can't send a correspondent and they can do a live shot from now. Because you have amazing bits of technology that, for example, give you broadband via satellite. So you can go to most parts of the world, open a box that's the size of a suitcase, and you can get a correspondent live. Any big city these days where there's 4G, you could do it on your phone. But we're getting to that stage when you've not quite got broadcast quality, but you can do live shots on your iPhone. We did one, for example, during the Charlie Hebdo situation and the shootings a few weeks ago. So the world is very much smaller than it used to be in terms of our ability to get there, get the story, get there quickly, and broadcast back to London or wherever it might be. My other main responsibility, as well as deploying people, is their safety. So when I send someone to Syria, we will be sending to Syria next week. It's nearly the anniversary, nearly the 4th anniversary of the start of the war there. We have to be very careful about what we do, where we go, our responsibility to our staff, what they are prepared to do. I would never send anyone, neither would any other organisation that didn't want to go. It's fine to say no to go into these nasty places, because they are nasty and bad things can happen. But all of the people that we send are experienced, they all have proper training, they all are aware of the dangers, but that's part of what being a correspondent or being a journalist, because it's cameramen as well, cameramen, camerawomen as well that go to these places, that's part of what they are and what they do. They have that passion, they want to go there, they want to tell people about the things that are happening in Syria or in northern Iraq or in Nigeria or in other difficult, dangerous parts of the world. So that's another part of the responsibility that I have in terms of deploying those correspondents. The next question that I always have to answer is, what is a story? Those editorial decisions. What is a story that is an ITV news story that may be different from a Channel 4 news story or BBC story or a Channel 5 story? Why would people be interested in a particular story about some Russian politician that no one's ever heard of that was killed near some place that most people have never heard of either? And that's a more difficult one. That's one that is based on what's gone before. In the case of that particular story, who did it? Was it the Russian president that did that? Its links to Ukraine, what's likely to happen. In the case of that story, he was shot on late on a Friday night. There was due to be a big rally in Moscow on the Sunday. So the reasoning was he was high profile, the potential was that he was killed by the state, and there was a big rally at which there was a potential for violence against the state in that country. All those three things meant that it was a good story that we would spend money and send senior correspondents on. Would that get lots of pickup on social media? Would people be retweeting that story? Probably not. They'd far rather tweet other things, which I'll get onto later on. But that's an important story that we send on and we think that people should know. Those editorial decisions are not taken by me alone, they're taken by a group of people on stories that we think are worth telling. In particular in television news, has the story got good pictures? We did a story last night about a skydiver who had a seizure after he jumped out of a plane over Australia. Amazing video from a head cam of this guy plummeting to earth who was rescued and saved by his instructor. No great importance here, it's just a great picture. Just is a great watch. You'd watch it if you saw that on your phone. You'd probably say, wow, that's amazing. That's another reason that we do stories. There just is some amazing picture. Another reason is there a significant person involved. If something happens to an important person, and everyone knows who that person is, I don't mean that they die, but it could be that they die, then the chances are that's more likely to get on a bulletin because you know who that person is. There are simple decisions. If a country is at war with another country, you're probably going to cover that, particularly if that war is in Europe, like it is in Ukraine at the moment, or if the war has gone on and has terrible things happening, like in Syria. It's difficult to cover that conflict, but it's significant, it's important. We should be doing it. Can't do it all the time. We have to come in and go out of those places, but it's a story that we think is worth doing. The other thing is, how many? Does it involve death? What's the death toll in the situation? You may cover a hurricane where there's 5,000 people dead in a far-flung part of the world. Would you cover the same hurricane if there were 25 people dead? No, probably not. Probably not. There's always that sort of death count. There was a program editor at ITV News a long time ago who, when told there was a natural disaster in some part of the world, his retort was, when told there was a high death toll, as I say, name one of them. Which wasn't very fair, because there was quite a high death toll. And that wouldn't be our attitude now, but it certainly was back then from that particular program editor who doesn't work for us anymore because he's retired. I mean, current examples, there's obviously a celebrity and a coming together of a number of different things with Prince William's visit to Japan and China. It would be more interesting if Kate was there, undoubtedly, but she's not. But it has an interest on a number of different levels. He is representing the Queen in one of the world's most important countries for the first time, in a country that a royal hasn't visited for a long time. So there's a significance on that level, a sort of diplomatic level. You never quite know what the royals are going to do. Are they going to wear a silly hat? Are they going to do a silly dance? Are they going to say something that perhaps they didn't mean to say. So there's an interest on that sort of level as well. And then tomorrow he'll talk about one of the things that he holds dear to his heart, which is about poaching and ivory, which is one of those issues that people are interested in. Extinction of animals around the world, which he takes an interest in. So that on that level, there's a number of different of those themes that I mentioned that sort of come together. Syria, it's a war, there's terrible things happening, difficult to cover, but it's something that we feel we should be trying to cover. And then you have something like Ebola, where there is a terrible thing happening in another part of the world, which is quite hard to get a handle on, which for me is quite a dangerous place to send people because there is a risk of correspondents, cameramen, producers being infected. But also there's a tension and an ability to feel that story back here because people came back here with Ebola. So people feel as though it's something that could affect them potentially. So again, on a number of different levels, that sort of ticks boxes. Terrible story that we should be telling people about this horrible disease that's affecting many, many people, which we should be covering. On another level, you've got British doctors and nurses going out there, so people that people might know, people that people can see when they go to their own doctor's surgery or hospital that they can relate to. And then you've got something that might come back here. So on a number of different levels, that sort of works as a good story that we would cover. There are different categories of stories, which I'll get into with the tantalizing clock that is on 11 seconds at the moment behind me, which I'm sure you've all been dying to watch. And I'll show you a number of different stories. Now, I'm not going to ask any questions afterwards, and I'll show you one after the other, and I've categorized them. But I'll point out some things that perhaps aren't apparent when you first watch these and how they might actually, how you would have viewed it had you approached that story. Let's say you are new in the job. You're sent to somewhere like Haiti, which is this first example we'll show, and I've themed this as natural disasters because, again, a number of different things come together there. High death toll, video is usually very strong, and you get very personal stories of people, particularly in this case here. When you get to that place, you've probably got no power, you've probably got very difficult logistical situations to get through. But you have to cut through all of that because no one cares about that at home. All they care about is seeing a good story that tells them about what's going on there. And as a result of stories like this, lots of money was raised to try and help those people in Haiti in particular. But I'll let you watch this one, and then I'll just point out the challenges that were inherent in making this story work. Because if you'd got to the scene where this was happening, they perhaps wouldn't be apparent at first. This is a story that went out, as will become clear, 6 days after the earthquake hit. And the rest is self-explanatory. It's by a journalist who now works for NBC News, a guy called Bill Neely, who is one of the best television journalists in the business.
Of Haiti, the signs aren't good. It's day 6. The diggers tear at the rubble, making survival beneath unlikely. The scavengers at the bank search for money, not the living. One man looks on. Roger still believes his wife, a bank worker, just might be alive. He rushes in every time ground is cleared. This time, someone hears a noise. He calls for silence, then for his wife, Jeanette. Okay, she's there, she's alive, he says. They scrape away stones to expose a small hole and allow the first light to reach the woman in 6 days, her husband overwhelmed. I can hear Jeanette talking. I put a microphone in and ask her if she's injured.
Vous êtes blessé? Oui, j'ai des doigts cassés.
Yes, she says, my fingers are broken.
Vous voulez de l'eau, hein? Pour le moment, si vous pouvez me donner, oui, ça me fera grand plaisir.
She tells me she needs water. It would be a great pleasure. I'm thirsty and I can't see, she says. Then a message for her husband. Even if I die, I love you so much. Don't forget it. The risk of her dying remains. Not her husband nor anyone here has the equipment to get her out.
Would you like to take a look?
Suddenly, help arrives. Firefighters from Los Angeles.
Okay, there's her hair. See your hair right there. Yeah.
They push a tiny camera into the hole. Okay. And Jeanette is revealed. Her head is moving.
All right, we're going to get you something to drink first.
They get her water and then begin cutting into the cables and beams around her. The light is fading. Hope is not. Then our first clear sight of her. Dust in her eyes, smiling, wincing, but alive.
Okay, all quiet.
It's amazing. She's in incredible shape for the time period she's been in there.
You confident you'll get her out?
Oh yeah, I'm very confident.
There is just one major worry now, an aftershock.
We may not have a whole lot of time. Once it goes, it goes.
Okay.
How long?
On a camera, they've seen Jeanette's hand pinned under a beam. Free it and she's free. A rescuer reaches her hand. She is in pain.
Hang in there, Jeanette. All right, Jeanette, we're almost there.
But within 3 hours of first hearing her voice, she emerges.
1, 2, 3.
Her first words, "Thank you, God," and then an astonishing moment. The words of her song, "Don't be afraid of death." She told me she always thought she'd survive, but she wondered why this had happened to her.
Did you think you would live? Did you think you would live?
Live?
Yes.
Why not?
Well, this has been an absolutely remarkable rescue. The most remarkable thing of all is the life that's bursting from this woman's lungs. But obviously 6 days after this earthquake, the chances of finding anyone else alive in this rubble are now very slim.
All right, nice and easy.
Hi, Jeanette.
Jeanette Saint-Four is alive, and for her husband, it's a miracle. But her survival is the exception in a city of death. She drove away as if nothing had happened, to see for herself the horror that had been hidden from her. Bill Neely, ITV News, Port-au-Prince.
Okay. If any of you ever do a story as good as that, you'll be one of the best television journalists in the world, because that is absolutely extraordinary. The things that I wanted to mention about that, when you saw the shot near the beginning of Roger, this was a cameraman and a correspondent who were filming. They didn't know at that point, when he was standing there, that they would find his wife, but they filmed it. They filmed that man looking, digging, scraping away, and then the wife was found. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that you never see, that you have to do, the groundwork, the filming. They may have filmed 20 people, 30 people, and one of them, Roger, found his wife a few minutes later. The other remarkable thing is, doesn't happen very often, was the involvement of Bill in that story. He put the microphone down the hole because nobody else was there. So that's him directly involving himself in the story, which you could have a discussion about. But ultimately, as a result of that, they realized that she was in there, that she wanted water. I'm sure he thought about that when he was doing it, but that's quite unusual to see that. But as a piece of television news, made it all the more compelling, made it brilliant. And then again, think of the skill of the cameraman. None of this is staged. When he got that shot of her face in the monitor, the probe down there, that first tantalizing glimpse of her, amazing. Suddenly there was a face to the voice that you'd heard. Bearing in mind that they were out and they came back in to where I was staying in a sort of ramshackle hotel in Port-au-Prince at about 1 in the morning. They'd been there for something like 7 hours, digging away. And the fact that they happened to stop at one particular place where that remarkable story happened, was that luck? Do you make your own luck? I find that people like that, like Bill Neely, make their own luck. You know, he saw that going on, he stayed there, he did the groundwork, there could have been absolutely nobody in there. He could have stopped at 10 places that day and have found absolutely nobody there. But it's something that illustrates the natural disaster. Amazing stories of survival or death, amazing pictures, great emotion, great sadness. And in many ways, the most remarkable thing is the way she just drives away at the end, in the car, with her hair a bit of a mess, but doesn't care. We went to see her afterwards. She moved to Miami. We followed up on her, and she's now living back, working in a bank. Her husband runs a dry cleaning business in Port-au-Prince, and they're getting on with their lives, you know. And she broke her fingers, and she had problems with her back and some other things, but absolutely amazing. There was another story the next night about a little boy. I'm going to zip this along a bit. Another little boy who was saved, called Kiki, who remarkably came out pretty much unscathed as well, but lost most of the rest of his family. Another theme, another area that I mentioned, wars.
We're on board an Iraqi army helicopter, call sign Fox 1. And the pilot needs cunning to pick out a safe flight path onto Sinjar Mountain, the precarious haven for the persecuted, surrounded by the evil of ISIS. It's a supply run for the Kurdish army garrison on top of the inhospitable peak. But inevitably, our arrival grabs the attention of the poor souls the soldiers are here to protect. Thousands of Yazidis are still stranded up here on what is a mile-high hell, a place where clean drinking water is a rare and glistening prize. The helicopter crew tried to get the people to keep their distance, but they wouldn't be shooed away. They've been through too much, and the helicopter represented the prospect of salvation.
As safe havens go, this mountaintop really is the devil's alternative. It's baking hot and bone dry. Survival depends on these airdrops, but sadly redemption from the skies has come too late for many of their kith and kin.
After giving them food, the crew picked out a handful of people to take off this mountain. These were hard choices, and eventually it was too much for the pilot, who changed his mind. He would not countenance leaving any of them behind, and so they all rushed on board. Sadly, the first takeoff attempt failed. We were too heavy. 5 had to get off. The young men were the obvious choice. An older man said a stoic farewell to his family and went down the ramp. The weight difference was just enough, and to the relief of all on board, we took to the air. This was a life-saving flight for these people, and their emotions were all too plain to see. They had survived more than a week on a barren, lofty island, hounded by bigots who want to wipe them out. The pilot, a hero, came back to check his handiwork on this, his last mercy mission on a long day. This helicopter has the capacity for 15 passengers. I counted more than 50 on board. It was standing room only for a few of us. On the way out, there was just one surprise. But he was checking his weapon. This was a safe home run. A little triumph for good over evil. John Irvine, ITV News, on helicopter Fox 1 over northern Iraq.
The thing you should know about that is they landed from that helicopter in a pretty inhospitable place, having got back at 4:30 British time. That was on the news as the top story at 6:30. This is a place where there's no internet, there is power. That's what you can do these days with the technology I talked about earlier on, with a thing called a BGAN, which I won't bore you with, but it gives you broadband technology. That was pretty remarkable to turn it around in that time. That was probably the edit for news at 10, so they had a little bit more time, but the evening news was pretty similar. So technology is enabling us to get stories back more rapidly and from places where otherwise we couldn't do that from many years ago. The other thing to mention about that piece is faces. Just think of the faces that you saw in there. It's a big story, big issue, Yazidis on top of Sinjar Mountain, and yet the cameraman managed in fairly difficult circumstances, and they put it in the edit, those faces of the pilot, of the children, of the adults, just those personal stories and the emotions that bring it home, how terrible that situation is, along with the wonderful scripting of John Irvine. And the last thing to mention about that is that the next day, that helicopter crashed and that pilot was killed, which tells you a little bit about the dangers of going up in one of those helicopters, from my perspective with journalists, but the dangers they all were in that situation. Now I'll show you a more sort of classically war-type story, which is, again, Bill Neely, who you saw in the first piece, but again, for obvious reasons, very dangerous.
5 a.m. and Apache attack helicopters move forward. Twice they tried to resupply British troops at Sangin and failed. It seemed like third time lucky, but lucky's not the word for it. The gunners fired as the 4 helicopters approached Britain's most exposed military base in Afghanistan. This gunfire was nothing to what followed. There had been warnings of a Taliban threat to helicopters, so British troops were ready in strength at the landing spot. But as dawn broke, the Taliban were ready too. They were hidden near the helicopters, and as we landed, they prepared to launch their ambush. It came seconds after we hit the ground. The Taliban fired from several positions, our camera damaged in the chaos. Troops retaliate with massive firepower, light tanks and dozens of men raining ammunition on the Taliban. Afghan troops firing rocket-propelled grenades. The Taliban too fire RPGs. They fly just over our heads. The troops catch glimpses of the Taliban between 5 and 10 fighters. Gunfire is intense from all directions. Heavy machine guns and tanks outgunning the Taliban. Above, the attack helicopters open fire repeatedly. It all lasts half an hour before the troops make it back to the base, where the mortar teams are busy. The Taliban are a mile away. All the troops return unscathed. They believe they killed 3 of the Taliban fighters.
For the last 3 weeks, we've been under pretty much constant bombardment from the mortars. We've had a lull for the last couple of days, however, things have started to change again, as you've seen this morning.
It's obviously unlike anything I've ever experienced or could have imagined before we left the UK.
Just before dusk, it started again.
At my command!
The troops return fire from the roof of the compound.
No British base has come under attack more often than this one, and it's just been attacked again with rocket-propelled grenades fired by the Taliban, and the troops are now firing back with heavy machine guns and with mortars of their own. This has been going on for about 5 minutes now, the firing becoming quite intense.
See where the explosions are? Come forward of that. There's someone in the doorway. We've been fired on by RPGs.
The threat is fairly significant. The Taliban in this area are quite determined. They vary in their methods of attack, sometimes from direct fire weapons, RPGs, mortars and rockets.
What we got?
This is a base under daily fire but giving no ground. The smoke of battle clear tonight, awaiting a new dawn. Bill Neely, ITV News, Sangin, southern Afghanistan.
Again, bravery from lots of people there. The soldiers who do that job, which hopefully that report gave you an idea of, perhaps better than any other that I've seen, of just what they were going through at that time. Soldiers who were husbands, uncles, fathers of people who were hopefully watching that. Bravery of the guys that we deployed there to do that job. You don't know what you're going to get when you hit the ground running there. But again, use of technology to get those pictures back. There's no internet there, there's no hotel, you're in a tent. Again, technology helping out with broadcasting that, but also raising questions back here. Should the soldiers have been in that situation where clearly they were in some difficulty, were being attacked on a daily basis? Was that the right place for them to be? And many years on, what was was it all worth it? Which people will be asking in a couple of weeks' time when there's a memorial or a service in the UK, in London, about the deployment and the end of that particular deployment. But again, amazing pictures, amazingly written, in the thick of it, telling a story that has a relevance to many, many people, and told brilliantly by Bill Neely. I'll zip through this one. This is, again, very recent, but again is another way of doing a story, another theme that we often get, that of refugees.
Islamic terrorism has made this Yazidi child a refugee and an orphan. When Nerveen was a newborn, an Al-Qaeda suicide bomber killed her father in Sinjar. Last week, when ISIS fanatics attacked the same town, the 5-year-old and her mother got separated as they fled. The child doesn't know it, but her mother died on Sinjar Mountain 3 days ago. Nerveen's uncle says she's become withdrawn and keeps asking when she will see her mother. He says he makes up stories but can't tell her the truth, only when she's much older. Nerveen and her extended family are sheltering in a school, along with many other Yazidis. In a region awash with lost souls, it was the only place available.
Such is the great need for accommodation. All the schools in this area have been taken over by refugees, and what lessons they've been taught on the subject of man's inhumanity to man. There's nothing these people have to learn.
This man made it here with just his son. He says his wife and 3 daughters were kidnapped by the jihadists. What did this little girl do to deserve that, he asked. This baby was born on Sinjar Mountain just over a week ago. The infant girl is being looked after by her aunt because her mother is ill after the birth. The woman asks us to come up with a name for the little girl, and we suggest Hope. She says she likes it because it's all they have left to hold on to. The orphaned girl Nerveen is kept busy by her cousins, and like everybody here, they are just living day to day. Her future is one of homelessness, handouts, and a heartbreaking revelation. John Irvine, ITV News, Northern Iraq.
Big story, quite literally through the eyes of a little girl. Beautifully shot, beautiful script, with the horrible revelation that she doesn't know yet in there. Also the man with the pictures showing, a greater loss, but literally making it personal so that people care about it. If you've got a sea of faces, it's quite hard to get a handle on that. If you've got one little girl who is indicative of the bigger picture, it's a great way to tell that story. Incidentally, we have filmed with her again today, and I think probably on ITV News tomorrow you'll see where she is now and what has become of her 6 months on. Little change of tack now. Barack Obama, I was lucky enough to be involved in coverage of both his elections. This was January the 3rd, 2008, at the first round of elections for the Democratic presidential process in a place called Iowa Caucus, where people literally stand in a room and they go over there and they hold their hand up for Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama's over there. John Edwards is over there. Never seen somewhere where democracy has been so much, obviously, in action. Barack Obama won that night. He lost the next one against Hillary Clinton. This is the report that night. Afterwards, I'll explain how we got that interview with him, because it's quite interesting. But again, how to make a political story hopefully a little bit more interesting. Obama was really.
You're looking at a new guiding light. In Barack Hussein Obama they trust. Democrats here have chosen him to lead their country out of the rut.
At this defining moment in history, you have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
As a black man standing here as a caucus winner, he'd already taken his nation across an important threshold, but he wants so much more. From humble beginnings, Obama says he knows the way to higher ground.
Hope. Hope is what led me here today. With a father from Kenya, a mother from Kansas, and a story that could only happen in the United States of America.
Americans always have the capacity to surprise themselves and the rest of the world. And the voters of Iowa have truly done that here tonight by putting their faith in Mr. Obama.
A little later, I spoke to Mr. Obama. First commenting on my accent, he answered my question mixing humor and levity.
What's your message for the rest of the world, sir?
Well, first of all, there's a little village in Ireland where my great-great-great-great-grandfather came from. So I'm looking forward to going there and having a pint. The message is America's back, and we're ready to lead, not just with military power, but with our ideals and our values, and listening to the world, not just dictating our agenda.
45, 46,
47.
At the voting caucus we went to, half the people who turned out delighted themselves by voting for Barack Obama. What Hillary Clinton didn't want to hear, she lost the battle of expectations. Third is a lowly finish for the former front-runner, who a year ago looked like she could coast to the White House. She tried hard to put on a brave face.
I am so ready for the rest of this campaign, and I am so ready to lead.
On the Republican side, Mike Huckabee, the easygoing former preacher, was the clear winner here. But his appeal may not transfer to the next contest in New Hampshire. It's the veteran John McCain who's expected to mix things up by prevailing there. The key question, however, is can Hillary Clinton recover in just 4 days? All of a sudden, she's developing a limp, while her charismatic opponent appears to be hitting his stride. Obama's one up, with 49 to go. John Irvine, ITV News, Iowa.
Hillary Clinton, anyone remember her? You'll see her again. Just a little thing about that. The interview with Barack Obama, it just illustrates that even in the events that are very staged like that, if you're persistent and you're determined to get something, you may well get it. Getting that interview involved climbing under one barrier, over another barrier, going to where he was shaking hands with the general public. He walked past us at that particular point. We went around the back of the stage, found the area where his friends were celebrating with champagne, did some interviews and got chatting with one man who turned out to be his former boss from a law firm in Chicago, who said, "Would you like to talk to Barack?" And of course we said, "Yes, please." And so when he was introduced by the gentleman who, you would have missed him, but he was on the right in the shot when the interview was going on, as Irish television news, because of course John Irvine and his cameraman are both from Ireland. It wasn't Irish television news, it was ITN or ITV News. And we got that interview, which was great. And the rest of that campaign was amazing. These events are very staged, but with something like that, interview with the main protagonist, you can make a piece. You know, that interview when he talked about going to the pub, which he then visited when he went to Ireland a couple of years ago as part of his trip. It just makes it and brings it a little bit more home. It humanizes it. It's not just him giving a speech. It's him being a human being, just like you and me, which he is. Last one. I can't tell you how much fun I had doing this one. This is one of those stories where, and it's another category, something that happens abroad but happens to have a link here, and I'll explain what it was after you've seen it.
The River Thames has almost frozen over. Outside Covent Garden Market, patriotic Londoners are skating. Today's high will be 6 below, yet this London is functioning perfectly. That's because here, a plummeting mercury and piling up snow are the rule, not the exception.
Do you think it's cold?
You know, it's not as cold as it normally can be, but you can see I'm already starting to get the tears coming out from all of the weather.
They've just got another couple of the more than 200 centimetres of snow they expect each winter. But that presents no problem for the fleet of ploughs operated by the man whose job it is to keep London moving, no matter what comes down. How long will this mountain of salt last?
Well, this is one of about 4 piles in the city, and it will last us for most of this season, considering that we have the 4 piles in total.
Right.
But we are close to the salt mine. It's about an hour away.
You've got a bit of an unfair advantage there, having a salt mine so close by.
Indeed, yeah. Who else has a salt mine, eh?
On the rare occasion that the streets of London are overwhelmed, there's always... Snowmobiles are fun, of course, but they can also have a serious application.
We've had an incident last year here where we had a snowstorm on the highway, which is not very far from here, where the Ontario Provincial Police called us and asked us to go out and search for stranded vehicles because they couldn't get through.
But you could?
Yes.
Not far from London, Ontario, in the American state of Michigan, there's a small town we felt we had to visit. We're here to find out what happens when hell freezes over.
We don't consider hell froze over until the water stops going over our dam here.
Right.
All our water in hell is dammed.
For some of the locals, hell in winter is heaven. In this part of the world, they've learned not just how to cope with, but how to embrace the harsh climate. But then here they have no hope of avoiding it. Not a snowball's chance. John Irvine, ITV News, in hell.
Okay, you can see it doesn't have to be all serious. It doesn't have to be all death and destruction and mayhem. We did that story because, if you remember a few years ago, you may not, but there was a satellite photo of the UK, and it was white, totally white. And things were pretty bad, apparently. I was in Washington with these guys, and they said, why don't you go to London, Ontario, and see how they cope with it, which we thought, oh, great fun. Great fun, and so all that became of that story. With the hell, because we wanted to go to hell for such a long time, and we thought, great, let's go to hell and throw that bit in at the end. But some of these things are organic. When we got to hell, we were in the local store, and they said, oh, there's this guy who has these big monster trucks, and he's like, oh, great, where is he? Just down the road. That little closing sequence, nice picture on a story that wasn't very serious, but did illustrate a point that other places can deal with it. It's not impossible to deal with a bit of snow, and even a lot of snow. The funny thing about that story is I landed back, to bring us full circle, landed back in Washington, D.C., and as we turned our phones on the plane, they all buzzed repeatedly, and the message was, there's been an earthquake in Haiti. Can you please go to Haiti? We weren't exactly dressed for that trip, having come back from -15. To go to Haiti, which was something about 35 degrees. So that's the range of different stories that you can get. Just want to end by just talking briefly about the way things have changed since I was here and when I started doing this job, not this particular job, but I started in journalism. And the biggest thing is something you'll be far more aware of than I am, which is social media. When I started, people were just beginning to have emails. Nobody had smartphones. There were pages, as I said. There was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. That is a blessing and a curse in what we do now. We can use Twitter and Facebook for news gathering purposes. We can find out information, which we then have to verify, of course, which is the downside of it. People can post anything, say anything on Facebook and Twitter these days. Is it true? Is it not true? It's a total minefield. Equally, we can use it to our advantage. I can put out a tweet saying, please watch our piece tonight on ITV News, on Naveen, the little Yazidi girl. We've caught up with her, etc., etc. And hopefully people will either watch that on the website or they'll watch it on television. Because there is that convergence these days of newspapers and television. Newspapers which are now online, all of them, have video, which they didn't used to have in the past, clearly. We are now online and we write articles. So there is that coming together of the two in a way that is new and is changing. And the challenge for us is to manage that going forward with the app that we have, with the website that we have, what differentiates us from other broadcasters. How do I make people want to listen and watch foreign news? Because can anyone guess what the most viewed story on the ITV News website is today? It's not foreign, I'll tell you that. It's about the what? No. No, not bad though. Weather's very popular. Weather's very popular. It's the woodpecker that has the weasel or the stoat or whatever it is on the back, on its back. Yeah, exactly. Which is sort of quite compelling. And you look at it and you think, oh, that's quite interesting. And so I can see that. I get that. And I'm not against any of that. I just see that that's really interesting. But that's not an obviously televisual story. It's a sort of poor quality still, taken on a phone, I think, but it is just remarkable for its imagery. The challenge in television terms is how do I turn that into a piece of 1 minute 30 of television? You'll know how difficult it is to make 1 minute 30, let alone 5 or 6 minutes. So that's the challenge in terms of what you do, but that's the most popular story. But we get 30 million hits a month on our website, 15 million individual page views. The resources that we have on the website are far less than people like the BBC. So that's the challenge going forward, how I make interesting, or make people interested in doing those, in looking at stories like the ones you've just seen there. Because why would you look at a story about snow in London, Ontario? But that is a challenge. I don't have an answer to that. But going forward, moving away from just sitting and watching it on your television and watching it on all your phones or your laptops or your tablets is where it's going. We know that, and what I have to do in the future is try and make people watch a little bit more of what we do in the way that people do and the way that you all do now. I'm more than happy to take any questions about anything you've seen or what I do or whatever.
You're responsible, obviously, for the safety of your own crews. Do you ever draw the line in what you take from freelance crews who obviously push the boundaries?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll use a recent example. We've got a man, Australian freelancer, who filmed for us yesterday in Sierra Leone. He filmed in a British-run clinic, doctors and nurses from the NHS. There is clearly a risk to him in going there and filming that. We go through procedures in terms of insurance, in terms of the risk he's putting himself in terms of what we tell him are our procedures that he should be following. But yes, we would on many occasions say, no, that risk is too great. There's another example of someone that's filming at the moment in Afghanistan for us. He wanted to fly to a particular place, drive 5 hours to another place, which was wholly unacceptable, because all the evidence we had was that that was a place that was full of Taliban, and as a British former soldier, he was likely to get into some very serious trouble if he got caught.
But if you push that one stage further, the shots that are already taken by a freelancer that you haven't actually directly employed, do you ever draw the line from materials that you take from them? It's already shot.
Yeah, if stuff is already shot, the risk there is, of course, if you're buying that from somebody, because they will charge you, you will then be encouraging them to do it again. So yeah, you have to make an editorial decision on they have been to shoot this, you haven't commissioned them, which is what's different about the first example. We have said to him, can you go and film this for us in Sierra Leone in that case? and the difference between that and somebody who's already shot it. Yeah, we would buy that sort of material. We would then, on a case-by-case basis, have to say, we will not buy any from you again, or I'm planning on going out, well, please don't do that for us. So yes, we would buy it. If we don't buy it, somebody else might buy it. He's already put himself in the danger. We had nothing to do with that. He wants to sell it to us. So yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis. You decide the editorial merit of that story. Is that something that we want to be telling? Is that something that we can make use of to tell that particular story that is an important story? Yeah, we would conceivably buy that, but we also take into consideration, but don't do that again, or no, actually we wouldn't say don't do that again. We would say, we would take it on a case-by-case basis, but we're aware that it will be encouraging them, and then we have to do it wholly differently. Because if they then want to go again, we have to consider, do we want to cover them on our insurance? Is this something that we want to do and commission, which probably, depending on the situation, we may or may not, depending on the risk. Yeah.
You do follow up on the little girl from the war zone.
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow up a lot of the stories? I'm kind of wondering what happened to the 5 men that had to get off the helicopter.
Yes, difficult to follow up on them. You can't always do that. I suspect that they are all fine, because most of the people after we got off that helicopter did get off eventually, but they could have been on the helicopter that crashed the next day, the same helicopter that crashed the next day. We do follow up when we think it's worth it. You can't follow up on everyone. On personal stories like that, when there's one obvious little girl, then that's easier to follow up on. We're going to follow up on a story we did in Sierra Leone about a little boy, Joseph, who lost his parents, being looked after by his aunt. If there's merit and there's something to say, we know that her situation has changed. We know how she is now. There's something to say that also illustrates a bigger point. We wouldn't follow it up for the sake of it necessarily, but if her situation illustrates something that is resonant of a bigger picture or gives you an idea about what's going on, then yes. So we are with her because it illustrates a point, I think, the piece that we've shot today, in terms of what is happening to some of the refugees, the state they're in now. It's winter now, clearly that was the summer, much warmer, it's very cold up in northern Iraq and the Turkish border. So it is very different, but it has to take us somewhere. You can't just do it for the sake of it, I don't think. Yeah.
I was just wondering whether or not the Charlie Hebdo situation had much of an impact on the way in which ITV and other news organisations went about reporting on them, because it was a daily, it was changing daily.
Yeah.
Made the landscape of journalism the way it was reported change?
There were lots of discussions over whether we should show the image on the front of Charlie Hebdo that was the offensive image, and we talked to lots of people, not least those who would be potentially most offended by it. And it was a decision that each newsroom took its own course on. We chose, and it wasn't ultimately my decision, but I was involved in the discussions that took place. I decided not to show it because from the soundings that we were taking, it was offensive to people, a certain number of people. We would therefore be publishing something that we knew would be offensive to them, and we took the decision that that wasn't something that we wanted to do. We didn't take it because we were somehow fearful of some reprisal or backlash in this country. Now clearly you could take the view that there are offensive things shown every day. Can't think of anything in those reports there that were particularly offensive, but there are certainly things that we show that people might be offended by, and if we took the decision never to show anything offensive, now clearly that's a line we would cross. That's a line a route you can't take. With that one, we knew it was an image that was, as I say, offensive. There were long discussions over it. We chose not to do it because it was something that we knew would upset a particular group of people that might be watching our program. So it hasn't changed the way. It was a good decision, a good discussion to have, because it hadn't really cropped up before, not showing a particular image that would be that was of that nature. And we would take it on a case-by-case basis. We might show it for whatever reason next time. Yeah.
How important is it for foreign correspondents to be able to speak more than one language? Would big companies be more likely to employ someone?
I'm thinking how many languages those people that you saw there speak. John Irvine speaks English and nothing else. Bill Neely speaks some French, I think, and some English, and maybe something else. It's not necessarily. It's important to be able to write well. Matt Fry, who is one of the reporters, one of the correspondents, who won Reporter of the Year recently at the RTS, is, as you might guess, German. Matthias Fry. You wouldn't know that from the way he writes in English. He writes beautifully and is a great storyteller. No, it's not important. It can help you in certain situations. The most important thing, I think, in terms of languages when you're going on a story is to find the right person to work with when you get there. So finding the right fixer or the right producer who is probably local, certainly speaks the local language, and hopefully has a bit of something about them that would know what you're after. If you've got a good producer, a good fixer on the ground that can probably help the correspondent, but also probably a producer that's with the correspondent, because there's a lot of logistics involved in some of these stories, then that's far more important than being able to speak a language, the correspondent being able to speak a language themselves. Why do you speak lots of languages?
No, I speak a bit of French.
Fine, okay. I speak French, that's why I was sent to the Diana story, so, you know, you never know, it opens horizons. I would always encourage people to speak other languages, because I was sent on that story because I spoke French, and then, you know, I'm here now, so, partly. Yeah.
The story with the woman down the hole, the microphone and the face in the aperture. If she died in the rescue attempt rather than coming out and going home in the taxi, would you still have used the images?
No, I don't think we would have. I'm not sure we would have done. I think it could have got on. I think it would have potentially been a story, but we would have. I suspect that what would have happened is we would have had something else as well, a story all the way through, for a bit. Yeah, perhaps we would. Perhaps we would. Yeah. I mean, you've got all the images. If you've got as far as shooting her with the camera down the hole, and then you've got a great sense of loss, it's tricky. Possibly. It depends what else. It depends what else had gone on around it. It would have been a very different story. Clearly, you know, the happy end, her singing, which is so important to that story, wouldn't have been there. Had she died the next day, what would you have done then? But before we went on air, you know, she actually collapsed at home and that sort of thing. You would have, I think, you would have still done that story, but then you'd have to follow up and do the story of the next day. So the images that were so powerful, yes. Would the whole story have been about her? I suspect it would have gone somewhere else, and they would have gone to another site to get something of some hope, because people were being brought out alive. The reason that's so significant is that it's 6 days, and there's someone that's still being brought out alive. Plenty of dead people being brought out at that point. Plenty of dead people, you know, unfortunately. Hers was a story not only of someone coming out successfully, but then doing what she did when she came out and singing, and then driving off in the car with her husband. You know, amazing. So I suspect we would have used it up to a point, but then it probably would have had to go somewhere else afterwards. The story that wasn't on there about the little boy Kiki, who was brought out on camera, we learnt where he was going, because I was there and I asked where he was going, so we went to follow up with him the next day when he'd all been cleaned up. And he was eating biscuits, and, you know, again, the end of the story was one of, actually, amidst all this horror, and he was the next night, he was 7 days below the rubble, was again one of hope at the end. We had made the point by then that this was a terrible disaster, and there were tens of thousands of people dead. By that point, you sort of needed to be showing people, actually, there are still people coming out of here alive, and there is some hope amidst this horror.
Fox News published the footage of the Jordan fighter pilot being burnt alive by the Islamic State. What's your opinion on that?
No, we've taken a decision on. Did they really? Did Fox News really show him being burnt alive?
They published it on their website.
Really, that surprises me. No. We've taken a decision to not ever show any moving images of any of the people in the orange jumpsuits. We show a still of Mohammed Mwazi, and we may have a little bit of what he's saying underneath that, but nothing of the sort of significant message. So we would never show. You actually can't show that. I mean, that's a moment of death, which regulations say you cannot show. So you've got someone being shot, you've got someone being burnt alive. I mean, obviously, you know, the sensitivities here, you wouldn't do that anyway, but legally we cannot do that. We get into a lot of trouble. But no, I mean, it's not even a thing I have to think about. No, absolutely not. You would never show that. I'm amazed. I didn't know they actually did that. I'm amazed.
Is that just in the UK, those regulations?
Yeah. I mean, Fox News is a cable news network in the States. It's covered by very different regulations than even the mainstream broadcasters there, which would be NBC News, not MSNBC, NBC News, ABC, and CBS. Fox News is a cable network. It has consequently far fewer viewers, although it's the most watched cable news network in the States. So the regulations I'm talking about are only govern broadcasting here in the UK. We're governed by those, which newspapers aren't. So some of the things that have happened this year in terms of print journalism only affect print journalism because we're quite well regulated already about impartiality, about what we can say, what we can show, and in terms of taking a particular political bias, which obviously we can't, but newspapers can. Yeah.
On the subject of the answers to beheading, a lot of journalists have said that it shouldn't be reported because it's drawing more attention to them and that's what they want. When you have to, obviously you still have to cover a story like that, but do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, what we're told really annoys IS is if you don't broadcast their message. So what's being said in a substantive form, because that's what they want, the audio more than anything. We can't stop people watching it. It's out there. It's there. It's on the web. If you want to watch all that stuff, you can watch it. So us not broadcasting it makes no difference to that. You'll see it anyway. If you really want to watch that, and it's not hard, watch it on your phone, on the train or on the bus, or as you walk down the road. You can see it. It's there. So whether we broadcast it or not is neither here nor there, really. It's going to be out there. So, but we do, because there's news value in those things going on. It is an important story. And what we can make a decision on, though, is how we broadcast that. Broadcast it in a way that we explain the horror of what's gone on without showing it, because we can't show it. So us broadcasting it, well, it's out there long before we get to see it. Yeah.
Do you ever have to tell a reporter to, not push boundaries in terms of seeking the action and going into somewhere that you deem unsafe?
No, I mean, I would. I hope that they're all experienced enough to have that little bell that goes off in their head that says, don't go there. I have had to go and deal with situations where people have got into unfortunate circumstances. So I would, and I would also say to them, please don't go anywhere if you think there's a problem there or you think you're going to get into trouble in terms of danger. And I don't mean trouble by asking difficult questions, because we always ask difficult questions when we need to. So I would. I haven't had to, because they're senior, seasoned, sensible people, and they don't want to get hurt or killed any more than any of us in here. But they know from their experience where the places are that are dangerous and where they're not. There are always those situations where you end up taking a wrong turn and going down the wrong road where you can't foresee those. Generally in situations where it is very dangerous. Sorry, that's the microphone. That's the microphone. You may have security with them anyway, who would be somebody that would be there as in an advisory role to say, if they need, what do you think about this situation? Should we go out today? Should we not go out today? Where should we go? Where should we not go? But I would never, like in the situation in Kuwait at the moment, there is a risk of arrest there in filming in certain areas. Well, that goes with the territory. That's very different from being shot at and blown up. So yes, I would tell them I haven't had to. Yeah.
I have two questions. Did you always know what sort of general area of journalism you wanted to go into when you were studying?
Nope, that's an easy one. I knew I wanted to be in. I thought television was great because I thought that was fun, but no. But I speak languages, so and travel is great. I can recommend travel, everyone.
And a lot of the previous speakers have said that to be successful or to get noticed, you have to try and be different So when you were fresh out of Trinity, what do you think made you?
I don't know if you have to be different. Maybe you have to be different if you're running a website or you're doing, competing with the many people who have their own particular sort of furrows to plough. I think what you need is a passion. I think you need a drive and a determination and an energy, and you need an imagination. Because if you've got all of those things and you really want to tell people about things that you care about, if you don't care about something, why should anyone else care about it? If you're doing it because you have to, then fine, that's going to come across. If you care about it, then that hopefully will come across. It gives you the energy to want to let other people know about it. There was a quote about you have to be angry to be successful in this business from somebody I won't mention, but you can look it up. I don't think you need to be angry. I think you need to be passionate. I think you need to be driven, as I say. You need to want to tell people about things you think are important because you think they should know about it. And I think if you've got all of those things and you've got an ability to go to bed late and get up early in the morning and not be bothered about being called or woken up or going somewhere you don't necessarily want to go or getting on a plane at 2 minutes' notice, then I think you'll go far and you'll enjoy it because it's great fun. Again, I shouldn't have gone with you because someone had go on.
Just a question you said about how much technology's changed. Just wondered if iPhones have made reporting easier, different.
Well, being bombarded by social media, which you generally get from your iPhones, is a double-edged sword. Yes, you've got lots more information out there, but that means you've just got lots of information to sift through and determine what's true and what's not true. So, yes, as a news-gathering tool, I think iPhones are great because they're not great as phones. Batteries are hopeless and things like that, as you'll all be aware, and the ring isn't good enough. But the other stuff you get with them is good in terms of the connectedness that you've got, be it with the internet, be it with email, be it with apps and other news websites. If I can read what's going on from AP, Reuters, and other newspaper websites on my phone, then I know what everyone else is doing and the lines I perhaps should be pursuing. So yeah, I think they're an amazing tool and enables people to be in touch far more than they perhaps once were. What I would say about that is, though, iPhones would not have worked in many of those examples. You would have not got a phone to work and get any data on Sinjar Mountain. So what you still need are those traditional skills in journalism of making a phone call, knocking on a door, going to the register office in this country and looking through records. If you don't know how to do that, then when the day comes when you do have to do that, then you're going to be lost in some of these places and others. So I would still, you need to know how to do all those things, but you need to know how to do the internet side of it as well. I think you were.
Considering risk to journalists on the ground, if the worst happened and someone who worked for you was kidnapped, would you pay ransom?
It's not us. It's not for us to pay the ransom. It usually would be a government that would be involved. So no, I don't think so. But it's not really.
Government say they don't pay ransoms.
No, they don't, and they don't pay ransoms. So it's not my decision to take because I don't hold the purse strings. What you'd like to think is that there would be means of negotiating some form of release. I don't know whether paying ransoms does any good. I don't know even if you paid a ransom, they would be released. Paying a ransom clearly only perpetuates it, which is the reason not to do it. So, I mean, most of the arguments in terms of paying ransoms only lead to more people being taken, more people potentially having bad things happen to them. So my instinct is to say that although you may really want that person back, and of course you will, you shouldn't pay ransoms because it only leads to it happening again, because you're a currency then. If you're not a currency, there's no point taking you. And I don't think those people that lost their lives were necessarily a currency. They were more of a recruiting tool potentially in what's going on at the moment and for IS.
I think that's the last question then. Can you join me in thanking?
Save the hard ones till last. Thank you.